video, we'll be tackling a more serious topic that is quite often left unmentioned in the community. Many in the furry fandom want to indulge in a fantasy of exploring their respective characters free of politics, drama, and other stressors of the real world. And while that can be highly beneficial, one topic is often swept under the rug because it is shushed out of commonplace conversation. We're taking a different approach and discussing it today. In my past videos, I've largely glazed over the sexual side of the fandom. And while that might put some parents at ease, I realize I've left out a part of this fandom that is largely misunderstood. Many furries that engage in the more lewd interests that exist in this fandom often have to hide those interests because of the perceived stigma of being associated with these interests or kinks. To combat this, I've decided to begin a series on these more after dark topics in collaboration with real furries who have these interests to help them demystify and hopefully destigmatize these interests. Because after all, you and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. So let's figure out how some do it for a series on this channel. While we have covered lighter topics in the past, today we're talking about something a little more serious that's often left out of conversation among furries. STDs and STIs and how they're handled in the fandom. Of the 56 that responded to my Google form, the two largest groups of respondents were cis males at 61% and non-binary individuals at 14%. Most respondents thought they had a pretty good understanding of how STDs and STIs work, with about 66 responding that they knew a fair bit. Of the 56, only 5% said that they had an STD, with herpes simplex and human papillomavirus being the two most often mentioned. We're going to do something a bit different this time around, and before going into all of the answers, let's look at what our respondents said they had heard about STDs and STIs in the fandom. What was most interesting in these responses were stereotypes associated with some of the answers. Fingers were pointed at mersuiters. People spoke about the spread of viruses being tied to con attendees not using protection, or opting not to get tested out of fear of testing positive. What was most shocking, though, was that of the respondents, 95% confidently said they did not have an STD or STI, but 43% said they'd never been tested. So if you don't show signs or symptoms, you can't have anything, right? Well, no. Instead of relying on what users in the community speculated, we looked into accredited medical sources to understand what the real facts are about STDs and STIs, not just in the fandom, but in the world. First, we looked at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, better known as the CDC. You might have heard of them. As of 2018, there were 1.8 million cases of chlamydia, 584,000 cases of gonorrhea, and 116,000 cases of syphilis just in the United States. As of their current findings, the CDC estimates that young people aged 15 to 24 make up just over a quarter of sexually active people in the population, but account for half of the 20 million new sexually transmitted infections that occur in the United States each year. STDs are pretty common in the US, and half of all sexually active people will probably get an STD by the age of 25. Many STDs don't cause any symptoms that you would even notice. The only way to really know is to get tested. Next, we looked at the World Health Organization for some more information. More than 1 million new cases of 4 sexually transmitted infections are contracted every day. Each year, there are an estimated 376 million new infections, with 1 of 4 STIs, chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and trichomoniasis, being found. More than 500 million people are estimated to have a genital infection with herpes simplex virus, and more than 290 million women have human papillomavirus. The majority of STIs have no symptoms, or only mild symptoms that may not even be recognized to your average person as an STI. STIs such as HSV type 2 or herpes simplex and syphilis can increase the risk of HIV acquisition, as it does leave you a bit immunocompromised. Now, we looked at these organizations not to scare you, but to give you some actual information on what we're looking at in the United States and globally. STDs and STIs are more prevalent than you'd think, and many don't present signs or symptoms. Also, you don't necessarily need to have sex to catch one. In some cases, it can be transferred by blood, by saliva, or just by skin-on-skin contact in areas where the skin is thinner, like no bits. So what puzzled me when reading responses was that a large disparity of those who were certain they didn't have an STD or STI never got tested. Go get tested. What are you doing? So what are we supposed to do? Well, back when it was discovered, HIV/AIDS was a very serious health risk, and continues to be in some cases, with complications that often led to susceptibility to other illnesses. It could very well be a death sentence when it was first discovered. However, is it still dangerous today? AIDS? Yes, but HIV? Hang on a minute. We looked at accredited sources to see if this was still the case and what other inaccurate assumptions we've made about STDs in the past. The first being, is HIV a death sentence? Well, due to advanced medical technology, patients that have been diagnosed with HIV are living longer and more fulfilling lives than ever before. With regular treatment, HIV patients can live normal lives and are even capable of having children that are HIV negative. According to the CDC, pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP as it's better known, is highly effective for preventing HIV from sex or injection drug use. Studies have shown that PrEP reduces the risk of getting HIV from sex by about 99% when taken daily. That's really good. Here's another one. I've only ever slept with one person, so I can't have an STD. Nope. Having sex with only one partner does not really eliminate you from contracting an STD. Even if you yourself have only had one partner, it's still important to consider that your significant other's past sexual experiences may not be so limited. The only way to be 100% sure that you and your partner do not have an STD is to get tested by a medical professional. I can't get an STD from oral or anal sex. You're very wrong there. STDs can be transmitted via semen, blood, or genital contact, sometimes even saliva. Having oral and anal sex will not prevent you from contracting an STD. It is important to practice safe sex at all times. Many of them are actually transmitted during oral sex specifically. Using 2 condoms will prevent me from getting an STD. Oh boy. No, and please don't do this. Here's why. The friction between the 2 condoms can actually increase the chances of the condom breaking or leaking, basically ruining the whole point of wearing one. Don't do it. In other media, Adam Ruins Everything was also discussing STDs, specifically herpes, and kind of explaining why it's not as big a deal as people think it is. In the episode that aired on December 7th, 2015, Adam laid out some pretty basic facts for his audience. 4 out of 5 carriers don't know they have it because they don't show any signs or symptoms. And worldwide, 90% of the population has some form of herpes, so not having it is incredibly rare, or as he put it, weird. Okay, now we've gone through some facts, but let's bring it back to the fandom, shall we? Look, I understand all this might be pretty scary. So what do you do if you get tested and you do test positive? Well, aside from the obvious best practices of being honest with your partner or new partners, using protection, and avoiding sexual contact when you're sick, is there anything else you should be aware of in this fandom? Well, we did add a few questions to our survey to see what our respondents thought of offering testing at conventions, given how common STDs even are, and how testing in the United States isn't necessarily free. Of those we asked, 88% said they were for testing at conventions, while 13% said they were against it. Where this gets interesting was that 14% also admitted that they did not use protection with new partners, and there was heavy overlap with those who didn't agree with on-site testing. But why? Well, to better understand, we were able to get one person to speak anonymously about their experience as someone living with an STD in the fandom. Let's take a look.
I've been living with herpes type 2 since 2016, and am asymptomatic, meaning I don't show signs or symptoms. When I joined the fandom, I wasn't sure what people would say since in my past I've had very mixed reactions from past partners. At best, I've gotten many that don't really mind using protection and understand that the chance of catching it is overall pretty low, or that it's so common that it isn't a big deal. At worst, I've been called disgusting, filthy, had one person spit in my face and call me a whore, or been publicly shamed by that person's friends. It took me over 2 years to come to terms that it wasn't really that bad, and I hadn't become some unlovable trash heap. But the stigma I had encountered did make me consider committing suicide a few times. Thankfully, I never followed through. In the fandom, it's alarming to see how much sex goes on at events without protection. I've overheard some members refusing to get tested because it will make them less desirable, or refuse to use protection because it won't feel as good. As someone that is more prone to get high because of what I have, that's terrifying. I don't want to risk catching something because someone was too proud to get regularly tested. More often than not, I only have any kind of sexual contact with close friends who are fully aware of my situation in advance and have gotten tested themselves. I wish more people would just suck it up and get tested. Even if you test positive for something, wouldn't you rather know than unknowingly spread something to someone you love? I don't know. The whole logic behind not wanting to get tested for selfish reasons makes no sense to me. I hope this was helpful.
Thanks for your insight. So, do congoers think those living with STDs or STIs, even those who are responsible and safe, deserve to be treated differently than those without? Well, incidentally, our survey revealed that 16% of respondents thought, yeah, they did. And while we didn't ask specifically, I've definitely overheard some things at cons that are some pretty abhorrent suggestions and aren't all that uncommon for people to say. Here's a couple of them. Quarantine those with an STD or STI in a removed wing. Make those with an STD or STI wear an armband to warn others of their status. Ban people living with STDs or STIs completely from cons. Now, realistically, we don't quarantine those living with these fairly common cases in day-to-day life, so why would we do that at a con? Wear an armband? I mean, I see the logic there, but I can't help but think of what our anonymous responders said about being shamed and being poorly treated. Making someone wear a visible identifier seems archaic and kind of dehumanizing. And banning? Okay, that's just silly. Not everyone who goes there is going to try to boink their next door neighbor in the other hotel room. Don't just do that to be spiteful. That's ridiculous. So what do? What are we supposed to do? Hope for the best? No. If you're worried about STDs or STIs, the most effective way to avoid them is to avoid physical contact entirely. But you're not going to do that, let's be real. Instead, get tested regularly, use protection, have honest conversations with your partners, and if you're not 100% comfortable being intimate with someone, hold off until you are. I hope this has been helpful, and until the next video, bye! Please stay safe during this quarantine time. I know stuff's a little rough right now. I sound a little sick. I have been. If you are not an essential worker, stay at home. See you next time, guys. Bye.